I think the builders of tomorrow with this type of software have more in common with very practical people around the house who are always fixing things and who won't let like a leak go for 2 weeks unattended, but he'll just fix the leak with some random piece of pipe and an old tire and it just works and it's great.
Welcome to Founded and Funded. Today, investor Jon Turow hosts Gabriel, Hubert, and Polu, the co-founders of a 2023 IA40 winner, Dust. Dust enables information workers to create LLM-based agents that help them do their own work more efficiently. Gabe and Stan go way back, having started a data analytics company that was bought by Stripe in 2015, where they both stayed for about 5 years. After stints at a couple other places, like OpenAI for Stan, they decided to come back together in 2023 to work on Dust. In this episode, Jon talks to Gabe and Stan about the broader AI LLM ecosystem and the classic adoption curve of deploying models within an enterprise. They talk about Dust's bet on horizontal versus vertical, the builders of tomorrow, limitations of AI assistants, and so much more. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jon to take it away.
Okay, well, thanks so much for joining, guys. This is going to be fun. So, you guys have made a really fundamental product choice that I'd like to study a little bit, which is to build something horizontal and recomposable. And depending on what choice you made, I imagine we'd be having one conversation or the other. So on horizontal, on composable, you're going to say, well, there's so many use cases and flexibility is important, and every different workload is a special snowflake. If you had decided instead to build something vertical, it doesn't have to be AGI, but you'd be saying, well, in order to really nail one use case, you need to go all the way to the middle, and you need to describe the workflow with software in a very, very subtle and optimized way. And both of these would be valid. So how do you think about the trade-off between going vertical and going horizontal? And how have you landed on that choice that you made?
I mean, obviously, to be honest, it comes with complexities and risks to go horizontal. But at the same time, if you assume that the product experience will evolve so fast, it's also the best place to be that kind of exploration, that playground for product exploration, because you are at the intersection of all the use case, at the intersection of all the data. I think during the current age of Gen AI, where we are mostly in a conversational agent interface, we are actually making the right bet, because it means we are on par on the UX, but we have access to much more data and we have much more flexibility. And so empirically, we have checked that hypothesis, meaning that at some of our users, we've been confronted with verticalized solutions. And on many use cases, we actually beat the verticalized solution because we provide more customizability, and that customizability comes in two flavors. First, providing, as an example, instructions that better match what the user actually wants to do in their company, which really depends on, as we said before, on the culture, on the workflows that exists. And second, being able to access multiple sources of information. And on some use cases, having two sources of information, and one being the one associated with the vertical use case, you're actually much better off, because you have access to all the information that lives on Slack, all the information that lives on Notion that is related to that vertical use case. And there are many of them. That could be sales use case, customer support use case. And that enables people to create assistants that are actually much better by being able to tap in that information that the verticalized SaaS products will never be able to tap into. Because as a verticalized SaaS product, it's going to be either the incumbent or somebody building on an incumbent. So somebody building on a customer support platform, somebody building on a sales data platform, whatever it is. And so I think in that interim where the UX is still being defined, we have an incredible advantage of being horizontal. That may close in the future, because as we realize what it is to efficiently use models in a particular use case, then it's all going to be about not getting a text output. It's going to be about getting an action that is ready to be shipped. It's about being able to send an email to a prospect automatically from the product, etc. And there we might have a steeper curve to climb with respect to the verticalized solution, because they'll be so more deeply integrated, and so they'll have the kind of a ready to go action built probably before us. So I think it's still kind of an open in the air questions, but as it stands today, feels like it creates a tremendous advantage. And so we're obviously still in the process of exploring what it means to deploy that technology within companies. And so far, that bet has been a good bet, but that's something that's maybe the most important product hypothesis that we've made. And so we're trying to check it every week, every month, almost every day. Was that the right choice? And today, I think we can confidently feel that it is the right choice today. But we also realize that we're inside of a moving ecosystem on moving grounds. And so that's something that has to be revisited at every day, basically.
I think some of the conviction that comes from data access being a horizontal problem rather than a vertical problem when you distribute to a company has helped with that choice. Like you can convince a CISO of the validity of your security measures and practices. And it's just as hard to do whether you need one sliver of their data set or all of their data set. So I think your bang for the buck is a little better when you want to play with more. A concrete use case of having access to very different sources of information to deliver on a fairly simple example. Imagine you had access to a company's production databases, and you could generate very smart queries on those production databases any day of the week. That's a product that we hope to see players that some players you've named or others that have today these like SQL editor interfaces that everybody in the team is supposed to use. Where in that product is the half-page document that describes what an active user is, or what a large account is, or what we consider to be low performance on customer support scores? Those documents live in a different division as the company grows. It's a division that doesn't even know that there's a code version of that. It's meetings where the definitions are updated in a very business-driven setting, and that constitution of what an active user is in a separate set of data. So for somebody within the company at low cost to be able to ask an agent a question about the number of active users in Ireland or the number of active users that are satisfied, you have to cross those data sets. And that's almost systematically the case. And I think a lot of the underperformance that you could look at or a skeleton audit in companies today comes from this siloed conversation. So to us, being excited to start another company, trying to build an ambitious product company, with the experience we've had from companies that have seen traction, that have grown fast, that have burnt out incredible individual contributors that start seeing the overhead and the slowness and how tricky it is to just get a simple decision pushed through because nobody has the lens to see through all these divisional silos. It seems more exciting too to build a solution to that problem. And when we pitch it to people who've seen and felt that pain, that's the kind of spark that goes off. So it is a risk, absolutely, but the sort of people that feel excited with that type of software existing in their team are, I would argue, that the people we're excited to build for the years to come. Come back in 5 years and let's see if we were right or not.
It's gonna be clearly
It's
days.
true. Fair enough.
Until the
one Gen AI year, so in 3 days.
a New York minute. It's so tempting to project some Stripe influence on the horizontal strategy that you guys have taken. And before I hypothesize about what that would be, can you tell me what you see? What is the influence of how Stripe is put together on the way you're building Dust?
Yeah, I think the core tenets are broad availability of the company information to most of its employees. So not having kind of a inner walls within the company in terms of information dissemination.
Oh, Stan, you're going in the direction of how Stripe as a culture has influenced us, which is also a really good question.
Yeah.
I interpreted John's question as like how Stripe as a business is a horizontal abstraction layer over a fragmented
Okay,
payment landscape.
then I'll let
Yeah,
you go
but
for
I
it.
don't know
Well,
which did you
I'm
read the
interested in
question,
the
John?
culture and the product design and therefore the business, but
Okay,
all of it is good.
got it. Okay, so I guess we'll hit all of them on the head. So go ahead, Seth.
No, yeah. So in terms of the way Stripe was operating, that influenced us in defining what we wanted to build with Dust. I think is a lot of um, creating a company OS where people are empowered to do their job at their best, which means having access to information and a lot of trust. And I think that some of that has floated all the way to our product decisions. And it's true that we've built a product that's probably not a great fit for a company that has very granular access control on who has access to that very small folder inside that Google Drive, and those people are added only manually, only on a case-by-case basis. I think we are on the optimistic side that the companies that will work the best in the future are the ones that makes their internal information available, and that is at the same time a great fit for building AI-based assistants, basically.
Yeah, and in terms of the product, I mean, to me, there's a ton of inspiration from what Stripe did to developers, and we gave them the tools to have payments live in the app before the CFO had actually managed to have a meeting with an acquiring bank to discuss a payments portal. I was like, developer comes to the meeting and says it's live. We've already generated $100 in revenue. What are the other questions? And that's it, right? And so, like, I think if we can build a platform that puts to bed some of the internal discussions as to which provider of a frontier model we should actually go and trust for the next 2 years, and builder internally says, I just built this on Dust and we can switch the model in the back if we feel like it's going to improve over the next months. Like, that's a scenario that I think the aggregation position is a good one to be in. It requires you to be incredibly trusted. It requires the composability. It does mean a set of technical decisions that are more challenging locally, but it enables, optimistically, I think, to Stan's point, some of the smarter, more driven people to have the right toolkit. And that's something that we definitely take from Stripe. Is like, Stripe was not a fit for some slower companies when we were there, and that ended up being okay.
That's such a polite way to say what you just said. When we think about the mission that you folks are going after, there's so much innovation happening at the model layer. But one thing that we've spoken about before is there's actually a lot you can accomplish today. And so, when we start talking about what it is that you can accomplish with Dust, can you talk about the requirements that you have for the underlying tech?
Yeah, I think one of the core beliefs we had in starting the company, that essentially dates back to Stan's time at OpenAI and his ability to be, front row seats at the progression of the various GPT models, is that the models are pretty good at some tasks and sort of surprisingly great at some tasks, and we're going to be facing a deployment problem for that type of performance to reach the confines of the online world. And there was an opportunity to focus on the product and application layer to accelerate that deployment. And even if models didn't get significantly more intelligent in the short term, so if you're sort of a little hesitant on calling an AGI timeline in the years to come, there's an opportunity to really increase the level of effectiveness people can have when they have a job that involves computers with the current technology. And so in terms of requirements with the technology, for us, it's let's make the models that are available today, whether they're available via API as business models or they become available because they're open source and people decide to host them and make them available via API, et cetera, and package them such that smart, fast-moving teams can access their potential in concrete day-to-day scenarios that are going to help them see value.
And I think the interesting tidbit here is that, of course, the models will get better as research progress, but on their own, they're not enough for deployment and for acceptance by workers. But at the same time, the kind of use cases that we can cover really depends on capability of the model. And so that's where it's kind of different from a classical SaaS exercise, because you're operating in an environment that moves fast, and the nature of your product itself changes with the nature of the models as it evolves. So I think it's something that you have to accept when you walk in that space, is that the hypothesis that you make about a model might be changed or might evolve with time, and that will probably require changing or evolving your own product as that happens. So you definitely have to be very flexible and be able to react quite rapidly.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there's two vectors that we spoke about before when we've kind of discussed this in the past. One is that if you stop progress today with the underlying models, there's years of progress that we can make. And the other is that, if we go one or two clicks back in history to say mobile apps, we saw that there were years of flashlight apps before the really special things started to arrive. And so where would you put us on that, in that kind of 2x2 of, early models versus advanced, and how much it matters versus not?
I think what's interesting is to talk about people who've, definitely on the early adopter side of the curve, who've been curious, who've been trying models out, who've probably been following, the evolution of ChatGPT as a very consumer-facing and popular interface. You get this first moment of complete awe where, the model is responding in something that seems particularly coherent, and I'm asking it questions and it's just amazing me with the answers. And then as I repeat use cases and I try to generate outputs that fit a certain scenario, I'm sometimes either a little surprised or a little disappointed. And sort of the stochastic nature of the output of the models is not something that people think about at the very beginning. They sort of attribute all of the value to sort of pure magic. And then as they get a little more comfortable, they start realizing that it might still be magic, or they might not be able to explain it technically, but the model isn't always behaving in a way that's effectively like predictable enough to become a tool. So I think we're quite early in the general understanding of what it means to work with stochastic software. Like that, I'm pretty sure we're on the left side of the quadrant. And then in terms of applications, I think that the cutting edge applications are already pretty quote unquote impressive. And by impressive, I mean that they fairly systematically deliver at a fraction of the cost or at a multiple of the usual speed, an outcome that is relatable with or on par with human performance. And those use cases somewhat exist already. Like you can ask GPT-4 or a similarly sized or performant model to analyze a 20-page PDF. And in seconds, you will get a number of points that no human could compete with that. And you can ask for a drill down analysis or a rewrite of a certain paragraph at a fraction of the cost of what you would be able to ask on a Fiverr marketplace or an Upwork marketplace for some tasks. We already have that like 10x faster, 10x better that smells like something's being disrupted. In terms of broad adoption, especially by companies, if you take ChatGPT, a few 100 million users, that still leaves 5.2 or 5.4 billion adults that have never touched it and don't even know what it means. But some scale for sure. But if you go into the workplace, I think that there are very few companies that are employing generative artificial intelligence at scale in production that were not created around the premise of general artificial intelligence being available. So like some companies have been created in the last years and do, but most companies that existed before that timeline are exploring. And they're exploring use cases, they're rebuilding their risk appetite and policies around what a stochastic tool might be bringing in terms of upside and downside opportunities and risk. And so I think we're still very early in the deployment of those products. One indication I have, and then Stan, I'll let you chime in, is I think that the conversational interface is still the default that most people are using and interacting with, when it's quite likely that it shouldn't just be conversational interfaces that provide generative artificial intelligence powered value in the workplace. Many things could be workflows, many things could be cron jobs, many applications of this technology could be non-chat like interfaces. But we're still in a world where most of the tests and explorations are happening in chat interfaces. That I use as an indication that we're still building trust. We still want the humans to be in the loop. We still want to be able to check or course correct. And so we're still quite early.
There's one analogy that I like to use is that today, to echo what Gabriel just said on the conversational interface, is that really feels like we are in the age of Pong, the game for models. It's you're facing the model, you're just going back and forth with it, and we haven't yet started scratching the multiplayer aspect of it. We haven't yet started scratching the interacting with the model in new ways and more efficient ways. And so you really have to ask yourself what's going to be the civilization 4 of LLMs? What's going to be the Counter Strike of LLMs? And I think that's something that is equally important to dig into compared to model performance. And that's really the mission we set for ourselves, is to be the kind of bet for users, to be the people that dig in that direction, try to invent what's going to be the C5 of interacting with model in the workplace.
Well, so that's as good a segue as any, Stan. I'm really interested in that. Can you talk about the mission for Dust in context of the organization that's going to use it?
Yeah, I mean the very easy way to do it is that as I just said, I think we want to be the platform that companies choose as a bet to augment their teams. We want to be a no-brainer that you have to use Dust to really deploy the technology within your organization and do it at scale and do it efficiently. And this is exactly where we're spending cycles. It's very funny to realize that today every company is an early adopter, because the board talks about AI, the founders talked about AI, and so the company in itself is an early adopter. But once you get inside the company, you're faced with a classical adoption curve. And that's where product matters, because that's where the product can help deploy the company through that chiasm of innovation inside the teams. And we want to be the engine of that. So we're not focusing on the models, and we're trying to be agnostic of the models, getting the best models where they are for the use case that are needed. But we really want to be that product engine that makes deployment of GenAI within companies faster, better, safer, and more efficient.
Yeah, I think one of the verbs that we use quite a lot that is important is augmenting. We see a tremendous upside scenario for teams with the humans in them. And we don't need to spend a lot of our time working for companies that are trying to aggressively replace the humans on their teams by generative artificial intelligence, because that's shaving a few percentage points of operational expenditure. And we think there's a bigger story at play here, which is if you gave all of the smartest members of your team an exoskeleton or an Iron Man costume now, how do you think they would spend their day, their week, their quarter? And what do you feel could happen a few quarters from now if that opportunity compounds? And so when we make decisions at Dust about different avenues to prioritize, one that's consistently a decision factor is, are we augmenting or are we replacing? Because by replacing, there's just a high likelihood that we, one, provide faster horses to people who just see the future as sort of very simply extrapolated from the present. It's like, I need to replace my customer service team by robots because robots are cheaper. When the entire concept of support and tickets as an interface between users and a company to discuss how a product is misbehaving or misperforming may be challenged in the future. So it's a tension for us because there are some quick wins or quick deployment scenarios that a lot of companies are thinking about. But it helps us, I feel, explore and spend time on some of the car as opposed to faster horses scenarios that we feel are really daunting upon us.
So let's unpack that a little bit, because I think it has implications not just for the individual workers, but to your point, Stan, and to your point, Gabriel, there's going to be a difference in how the employees interact with one another. And I'll put it to you one way. If I'm going to decide whether to join your company or not, and you're going to tell me, well, you should because I have dust, what would be the rest of that explanation?
It's a great point. I think that's actually an example we sometimes use to try and describe what an ambitious outcome for the company in a few years' time, or what an ambitious state of the world would be for our company in a few years' time. If you take a developer today, senior developer, getting offers from a number of companies, and in the interview process, getting to ask questions about how that company runs its code deployment pipeline. If as a developer, I can ask, how easy it is to push code into production, how often the team pushes code into production, what a review process look like. I can read a lot into the culture of that company on how it respects and tries to provide a great platform for developers. Today, developers are at the forefront of being able to read in the stack that the company has chosen, how they prioritize their experience. If you do not have a version control software that allows for pull requests and reviews and clouds distribution that works and is fast, I don't think you're very serious about pushing code. And we think that the future has many more of the roles within a company having associated software. You could argue that to a degree, Slack has created that sort of before and after aspect, where if you're applying at a company today and you ask, how do employees check in with each other in an informal way to get a quick answer on something that they're blocked on, and the employer says, well, we have a vacuum tube system where you can write a memo and just pipe it in one of the vacuum tubes that's available at the end of the floor, and then you'll get a response within 2 days, and that should help. You're like, okay, great. I don't think that real-time collaboration is prioritized. And we think there's a continuum of those scenarios that can be built. And so for us to be able to imagine a future where employers say, hey, we run on Dust, we would love that to be synonymous with, hey, we don't prioritize or incentivize busy work. Everything that computers can do for you, which really computers should have been doing for you decades ago, we've invested in a technology that helps that happen. We've built a technology that helps burn through overhead and time sinks of just finding the information where it is, understanding when two pieces of information are contradictory within a company, and getting a fast resolution as to which one should be trusted. The OS of that smart, fast-growing team is something that we hope to be a part of the strategy for.
That's such an evocative image of the vacuum tube. I actually bet if there were a physical one, people would like that, as long as there was also dust.
Yeah, I think it'd be a fun gadget that people actually send employee kudos notes to at the end of the week, on just cool. team praise updates.
So what we're talking about, though, is, there's a metaphor of the agent, which is really in our 2023, 2024 brain, we think of that as another member of the team, maybe a junior member of the team at the moment. And I think it was something you said, Gabriel, that the binary question of whether it's good enough or not is actually not useful, but rather how good is it, relative to other people I might find.
Just thinking about it in terms of distributions. Absolutely. And I'm only I stole it from the CIO of Bridgewater, who their communication around GPT-4 was, compared to a median associate or analyst, I can't remember what the name of the roles was. We believe that it performs slightly higher than a junior level analyst on these tasks. And Bridgewater is a specific company that has an opportunity to segment a lot of its tasks in a way that maybe not all companies are able to do. But as soon as you've said that, a number of logical decisions can be made around that. We often get asked, about specific interactions that people have had with Dust assistants. I was like, hey, why did it get that answer wrong? And I was like, assistants are getting a tough life in those companies because, a lot of your colleagues get a lot of stuff wrong a lot of the time, and they never get specifically called out for that one mistake, or maybe not with that degree of impatience. I think that's part of the adoption curve that we're going through, where it's at the level of an interaction, you're looking at a model that may be on average quite good and sometimes quite off. And so instead of turning your brain off, you should probably turn your brain on and double check. And at the level of the organization, you're getting performance that is in certain scenarios, potentially higher than median, and so then higher than if it got pushed to another member of the team for that specific set of tasks. And as models get better, and as the structural definition of the tasks that we give them get clearer, and as the interfaces that help feedback mechanisms get more and more used, those scenarios are going to progress. The number of times where you feel like the answer is good enough, or better than what I would have come up with on my own, or better than what I could have expected if I had asked a colleague. One of the things that we systematically underestimate here is also like the latency, right? Ask a good colleague to help you with something. If they're out for lunch, they're out for lunch. That's 2 hours. And general pattern is the one that says, violently executed good plan. A good plan violently executed today beats a perfect plan executed tomorrow. So if as a company you're able to compound and rely on that compounding sort of edge in terms of execution speed, I think the outcomes will be great.
So I think what we're talking about is assessing agents not by whether they're right or wrong, but by their percentile of performance relative to other people. And yet there's this other thing that you both have spoken about, which is that the failure modes will be different. And it's easy for a skeptical human especially to say that, well, that one weird mistake means this thing must be dumb.
Yeah. And I don't think it would be the first time in history that we've sort of misevaluated what technology was going to bring us by judging it on some anecdotal dimensions.
I think something interesting to jump back on your 2023 brain and how we might not be foreseeing the things correctly. I think there's a massive difference between having intern level or junior level assistants where this is a human, so you want to leave the task to them entirely and leave some agency to them. And so the shape of task that you can give to that person is defined by their capability and the fact that they're junior. And having assistants where the agency is kept on the side of the kind of a person that has the skills, right? And so there's a massive difference between what you can do with junior level assistants where you keep the agency versus just junior assistants for the humans. And it's going to be interesting to see how that automation and that augmentation of humans plays out. It might be the case that it's going to be very different from adding 10 interns to a human and adding 10 AI-based assistants to a human. It may well be the case that 10 AI assistants augments the human much more than having 10 interns. And so there's going to be kind of an interesting landscape to discover there.
Yeah, because I guess you have to think about what shape of tasks would keep them motivated, would allow them to align with their own career development goals, would expose them to sufficient subsets of the company so that they meet people. And
Well, depending on how you frame this, I'm either going forwards or backwards in history from unlimited manual labor to spreadsheets. And a Dust agent reminds me in many ways of a spreadsheet. These things can be...
Yeah, in terms of capability and like the level of abstraction versus the diversity of the tasks. I think that's not a bad analogy. Like it's unclear if the primitives that currently exist on Dust are sufficient to describe the sort of layer and space that we really intend on being a part of. But if we are successful, Dust will probably retain like some properties of malleability, the ability to be like composable, programmable, interpretable by the various humans that are using it, which does remind me of spreadsheets too.
One thing that you see in your product today is a distinction between the author and the consumer of a Dust agent. And it's reasonable to expect there's going to be a power law of distribution of more people consuming these things than creating them. Were there some way to really measure spreadsheet adoption, I'm quite sure we'd see the same. That a handful of spreadsheets, especially the most important ones, get created by a small number of us and then consumed by many more of us. but these things are infinitely malleable, and many people can create a silly one that is used once and thrown away.
Yep. And we actually see that today in some of our customers. We'll see the assistants, like I had product manager actually literally admitting that they had created a bit of a silly assistant that was mixing company OKRs and astrology to give people a one paragraph answer on how they should expect to be doing in the quarter to come. And they were just admitting that it was a distribution mechanism for them. It's like, I just want people to know about how easy it is to create a Dust assistant, how easy it is to interact with it, and how non-lethal it is to interact with it too. I think there's always that, that fear of use case or the first usage scenario. Absolutely. And I think that we talk about this persona a lot. To us, they're builders. The reason we believe that they're not going to be developers is because the interface having become natural language in many cases, you're essentially just looking at the raw desire for some humans to bend the software around them to their will. So I think the builders of tomorrow with this type of software have more in common with very practical people around the house who are always fixing things and who won't let like a leak go for 2 weeks unattended, but he'll just fix the leak with some random piece of pipe and an old tire, and it just works and it's great. Because that is seeing opportunity and being able to connect the Lego bricks of life. And I think in the workplace is like the Lego bricks are getting easier and easier to connect. And at some point, you don't even really need to know where the Lego bricks are. You just need to talk to the machine that goes and finds the Lego bricks. And you get something that's not quite the shape of what was on the box of Lego, but it works kind of similarly. And it works well enough. And maybe what you had intended to build in the first place is fully covered by the assistant at that point. So yeah, builders are, and I think one of the big challenges for companies like us and for us is how do you identify them? How do you let them self-identify, and how do you quickly empower them such that the rest of the team sees value rapidly? One of the limitations of assistants like Dust within a company is access to the data that the company has provided to Dust. So the number of people controlling access to the data gates is even smaller than the number of people who can build and experiment with assistants in some cases. And so how can a builder reach out to somebody at the company that has the keys to a specific set of data and say, hey, I have this really good use case. This is why I feel we should try it out. How could I get access to the data that allows me to run this assistant on it? Those are all the product loops. They have nothing to do with model performance. They have everything to do with generating trust internally about the company, about the way the product works, about the technology, where the data goes, all these things that are really just product problems.
Well, if I move half a click forward in history, you start to think about data engineering and how empowering it was for analysts to get tools like dbt and other things that allowed them to sort of spin up and manage their own data pipelines without waiting for engineers to turn the key for them. That created a whole wave of new jobs, a whole wave of innovation that wasn't possible before, to the point that now it's impossible to hire enough data engineers. There's this empowering effect that you get from democratizing something within a company that was previously secured, even if for a really good reason. And I'm connecting that to the point that you made, Gabe. The data itself that feeds the agents is often the key ingredient and has been locked down until today. Based on the use cases that you're seeing, this is going to be kind of a fun lightning round. My meta question is, has the killer agent arrived? And maybe you can talk about some of the successes and maybe even some of the fun things that aren't quite working that your customers have tried.
Sure, I can go first and then second. I think the answer to the first question is no. I think the killer agent as a product marketable concept that you can slap on your website and 90% of people who visit upgrade, regardless of their stage of company, their developing, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we're there yet. Many killer agents, like mini killer agents, mini me's of killer agents, maybe. No, on the surprising questions, I'm just incredibly surprised by how much people trust LLMs in some cases. They ask questions that I don't think that Dust, let alone an LLM without a connection to the data, would have no chance of answering. I guess it's like, how many tickets did we close last week on support? And it's like, that person didn't know if we were connected to intercom, didn't know what last week would be interpreted as in the in calendar settings. And they're going for it. So those are some of the interesting cases where I think locally and tactically we're failing because the answer is not satisfying. But where I'm seeing weak signals of success is that people are going to Dust to ask the question in the first place. And then on some of the use cases that we're incredibly excited about, it's almost similar situations, but with satisfactory answers, where people are asking surprisingly tough questions that require crisscrossing documents from very different data sources and getting an answer that they unmistakably judge as being way better than what they would have had by going to the native search of one SaaS player or by asking a team member, et cetera, et cetera. And in some cases, like, the number of assistants that mid-sized companies are generating on Dust is high. Do you see that as a success or a failure? Does that mean that you've been able to give the tools for a very fragmented set of humans to build what they need and you interpret it as success? Or do you think that we've essentially capped the upside that they can get from these two specific assistants? That's still one of the questions that we're spending a lot of time on today.
That one I can answer. That if we go back to our trusty spreadsheet metaphor, there are many spreadsheets. They are not all created equal.
Yeah, and it's fine. Maybe it's fine. Maybe not all spreadsheets need to be equal.
Guys, I think we could keep talking about this forever. This is so much fun. Thank you so much for talking about Dust and your customers.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much.